St. Peter's, 56 in Florissant, and downtown at the Arch, it's 56. I'm Maria Aquino, KMOX News.
News, traffic, and the latest from the world of sports. This is Rush Hour Sports on 104.1 FM KMOX.
All right, good to be with you guys. Welcome in. It's Tuesday here on Rush Hour Sports. Matt Pauly is out. Nate Gatter is in. I'm Kevin Wheeler. Good to be with you guys. Nate, what's up, buddy?
The way you said Matt Pauly is out, Nate Gatter is in, kind of made it sound like it was
substitution.
Something more significant than it was. Nate Gatter is filling in.
He's filling in.
Matt Pauly is very much not out.
No, that's a good point. Out tonight, and obviously Nate is in. Matt will be back, I think, next week. We'll keep you updated on that. But he's going to be back, I think, early next week. That's kind of the plan. We'll see how that goes. What's going on, man? What's new?
Not much. How are you doing?
You know, staring out my window, waiting for baseball stuff to happen.
Yeah,
no, I'm kidding. I'm watching college football.
Me.
I'm all over college football and the NFL and all that too. Just it's that time. You know, the GM meetings have started today, and it's this group of meetings is kind of, well, it's more like wait and see, right? Hurry up and wait, and then we'll get to the winter meetings, and hopefully between now and then we'll have some action. But I think what's fun right now in baseball, we're going to do this today. We're going to kind of walk through a bunch of stuff here on the show. And today, with the holiday, we don't have traffic updates. We got a little more time to play around. So this is a good day to do this. And I want to invite everybody listening to jump in, whether you're on the stream. So if you're on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you're able to jump right in there into the chat. You can text 314-436-7900 if you want to get in on this. But we're talking cap and floor, okay? We're not going to argue about whether or not there should be a salary cap. For the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to talk about what would need to happen and how do you do it, right? So we know the players are going to fight any form of limitation on player salaries. We know the owners are going to fight for as many restrictions as they can. We're taking that fight out of it, and we're trying to get to the nuts and bolts of, okay, let's say we're going to do this. How does it look? Right? Because everybody wants, I see a lot of buzz from fans who want to have a cap. And unfortunately, sometimes the NFL's cap and floor system is what's credited for them having the parity that they do. It's not really. It's the short schedule. And by the way, there are way more dynasties in the NFL than there are in baseball. But as you and I were talking about, Nate, more than the practical matters here. Image matters. And baseball fans don't like the salary inequities, and finding solutions to that is, whether it's a spreadsheet problem or not, it's a perception problem, and perception affects reality.
Yeah, I think anybody who works in marketing or branding or whatever could tell you that it's not enough to have a good product, right? Right? If you have a good product but people perceive it as being not very good,
right?
It's kind of folks will talk about like how many plane crashes have to happen for people to lose faith in flying, right? It's not very many. It can be, if 0.1% of planes in the United States went down, a lot of people would be canceling their tickets for the next day. So I say that to say, I think in an industry where baseball is scrapping for market share, like everybody else is, like any other business, it's scrapping for your dollars and your time and your viewership, whether that's at the ballpark or on TV, or your listenership on the radio, or your consumption of their other content. All of those things baseball wants. How you perceive baseball matters, and how you perceive the NFL in relative terms, how you perceive the NBA in relative terms. Those things matter to them. And so to that extent, I think it's kind of what you're talking about is process over outcome in some ways, right? Yeah. People have to feel confident in the process. If you say, well, the Dodgers don't win every year, and that's not enough to people if they feel like, well, when the Dodgers don't win, it's because they got upset by someone and that was a fluke. But when they do win, it's exactly what we expected to happen. People want to see, I think, a process that feels more fair, not just results that ultimately work out in a sort of fair way.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, right? I mean, there are more dynasties in the NFL than in baseball, but how you get there is different, right? The Chiefs dynasty is not because they're outspending anybody. Now, some of it's more luck-based, though, right? Do you end up drafting a quarterback that ends up being Patrick Mahomes or Ryan Leaf? And it's sometimes the top guy, and he wasn't even the top guy. But that's kind of the point. There is a skill to that, but there's also some luck involved when it comes to it. But you still have a team like the Browns who they're the Pirates of the NFL. Oh, they spend to the floor, but they still suck every year, and they have for 40 years. I'm a person that doesn't care about the how. I just care about the what. What's the end result? But I know that's not the reality for a lot of fans. And I think that just to walk through the ins and outs of, all right, so what does it take? So if we're going to say let's just say in a fantasy world, the players are going to agree to a cap and floor system. What's the cap? Let's start with that. Where do you set the cap knowing these facts? Okay. The top end of the total payrolls is about $350 million. And you've got the Mets and the Dodgers right around that. And then you've got the Yankees at 300, the Phillies around 300, and then it drops down to 250, 230, 225. So there's a pretty big gap between 1 and 6. There's a $100 million gap between 1 and 6, which is a big gap. But the median payroll in Major League Baseball is 130. That's what the Cardinals are. So the Cardinals have the 20th highest payroll for 2025, and that's the median. So based on knowing that the median is 130, the highest end now is 350. Where do we set a cap if we're going to go with this theoretically? Is it 300? Is it 350? How do we get the Dodgers and Yankees to agree to cut $50 million in payroll? And how do we do that with players who have guaranteed contracts?
Right. I think that's, ultimately one of the things that the caveat we're going to keep coming back to today is X, but X is not practical, right? To me, if the goal of this is to satiate fans, and satiate kind of makes it sound like that has a negative connotation. If the goal is to try to engage and meet fans in these secondary markets who feel like the process is unfair to them and who are losing faith in baseball as a result, right? The Pittsburghs and the Cincinnatis of the world. I feel like it can't be much higher than like 250. But that's a huge amount of money for those top teams.
Yeah, you're going to tell the
overcome.
Yankees to drop $100 million.
Right. And so that's why, again, not practical.
Right.
But to me, if you set the cap at $300 million, I think people are like, okay.
Hey,
that's like 3 teams' salary. Salary pools are going down.
Yeah, right now there are only 3 teams. No, 3 teams above 300, and then it's 2 of them are 40 and 50 million above that. Everybody else is below 300 already.
So I don't think that moves the needle for anyone. And
do you just have to tie it to I know that in a practice, this is where we're talking about this in today's dollars. In practicality, this will be tied to a percentage of revenue.
Right.
So the numbers will go up. Like the NFL cap goes up all the time.
Right. What we're talking about is
just
relative
talking about
to where the top
starting
spenders
point
are now. Where would we have to put it? And then it would
Correct.
increase essentially with revenue.
Right. The NHL does this. All of the capped leagues have cap numbers that go up as revenue goes up. And they could conceivably go down if revenue really crashes.
Which would be really interesting in baseball because one of the things it's done, in particular in the NBA, is create some sort of unintended consequences of players at certain junctures deliberately taking short-term contracts, even when they could have gotten much longer-term, much bigger guarantees, because for guys who are making the max, their competition, if you will, for salary is not negotiating with teams. Every team is willing to pay them the maximum they're allowed. What they're doing is fighting against the CBA and fighting against the whatever the cap is, and therefore what their percentage of whatever their dollar figure is based on the percentage of the cap they're maximally entitled to. And so you see instances where guys either, with a LeBron James, it's been more about he wants control of where he's going and where he's playing, and he wants that leverage. But there have been some other guys who will take shorter term deals or will hold off on extensions for a year or whatever because they anticipate that the cap is going to go up and then their number is going to go up and they're willing to, take the shorter term deal or wait and take that risk. Or in some cases, it's just you become eligible for more. That's why it was such a surprise when Jalen Brunson signed that extension with the Knicks, where if he had waited another year, he would have been entitled to, I think, $50 or $100 million more in total guarantees. Anyway, it would be very interesting in baseball where I feel like the AAV interest that dominates in hockey of like what's the average annual value of this contract has really faded into the background as guys have just said, well, if what I want is guaranteed dollars, 10 years, 12 years, 14, longer the better, right? Give me all the years you got. And if the AAV is low at the end, I don't really care because it's probably more than I'm going to be worth anyway if I became a free agent again after 8 years or 9 years or whatever. And so it would be funny if it ended up resulting in high-end baseball players and their agents saying, we're really looking for, forget about the 12-year. We're looking for more like a 2-year deal this year. Give us that huge, the Dodgers would talk about that for a while if they could entice guys to do it because they didn't want the long-term commitment. When Bryce Harper was a free agent, they were talking about like a 1-year, $60 million deal or something. Do you want to just reset the clock and do free agency in a year and we'll pay you, almost double what anybody's ever made?
That was clown show stuff.
Right. It was never going to happen
to do that.
Clown question, bro.
No, not clown. Good recall. And so here's this. So this is the fascinating thing. A conversation that often gets simplified. Just put in a cap. As you can see, even coming up with a number is really hard because you've got to get 30 billionaires to agree to something that will work for all of them. So the top teams have to agree to come down, right? And the top teams are going to have to share more revenue because the bottom teams aren't going to reach a floor. So then,
I think is the bigger kicker.
Well, yeah.
If they said, if this could be resolved with a cap of 300 and we would figure out some way to grandfather in where the Dodgers wouldn't have to immediately cut $50 million in payroll in a year or two. We were going to somehow ease that pain. But the cap was going to be 300 and the floor was going to be like 100 or 120 or whatever, something where it's not that far off the status quo. We're just maybe bumping up the bottom teams a little bit and we're shaving off the top teams a little bit, but we're keeping this huge gap. Still, the owners would balk if any revenue sharing is involved.
Well, I think that's the problem.
A very slight cap and floor relative to where they are now. I think that'd be actually probably doable. But the players would fight it. But the owners, I think, would be the top end owners would be fine with that.
Well, if you said the cap is 320 and the floor is 120,
yeah,
okay, great. But
you've changed almost nothing.
That changes nothing in terms of competitiveness.
And I think the Dodgers would say, okay, fine, our advantage remains pretty much the same. If you told the Dodgers they have to send a check to the Pirates, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, that's true.
But that's why the NFL is what it is, because there is no advantage financially to being the New York Giants over being the Green Bay Packers.
Right.
That's why the Packers can be a thing in the NFL. And the problem is they got that done from the beginning. And you're just not going to retrofit that in to a league that's not gone that way for the last 120 years. It's going to be really difficult.
In some ways, ironically, it's the NFL benefiting from the fact that they became a popular sport much later.
Yeah.
And much more quickly and sort of all as a collective, right? And like baseball was already so popular. And then TV came into popular baseball, whereas the NFL sort of rose into popularity with TV not being what it is now, obviously, and dominating the entire sports landscape and their dollars just dwarfing what anybody else is doing. But they were a significant player already, and the league sort of rose together in this TV era. And so it's just the timing. It's the NFL deserves credit for how they set that up, but I think it's more about they benefited from really great timing than that they were somehow visionaries, right? Baseball sort of didn't have a choice, but except to come into this in a piecemeal way. Like it's just how the sport was.
Yeah, it's the way it's gone over the last few years. So if we're setting a cap, we've set the difficulties there. When we come back, we're going to talk about similar difficulties setting the floor because that gets into the revenue sharing that we're talking about. I think we all agree. I believe that every team in baseball that is below those top 10, 15 teams could spend more than they do. But that doesn't mean that it's $100 million more than they do.
The top teams could spend more than they do.
The Dodgers could spend $500 million if they wanted to. They're an $800 million a year revenue producer. You could spend $500 million and have 300 left.
Which I think probably is, Bob Nutting, say the owner of the Pirates, probably part of what he has in his mind, which is if I said, okay, fine, I'm going to spend a higher percentage of my revenue than anybody else does just to try to get myself in the neighborhood of median payroll, the Dodgers are just going to respond by spending another 50.
Yeah.
And now I'm right back where I was in terms of the delta between us, except I just took $50 million out of my own pocket.
Yeah. So the key to it obviously is going to be the revenue sharing stuff. We're going to pick it back up. If you guys have some legitimate things, we got a couple of commenters that are just off doing their own radio show. So just ignore those two guys. They don't want to contribute. They just want to be smart asses all night long. That's fine. If you want to contribute, feel free. All you got to do is hit us up on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. That's where we're streaming. And of course, you can text 314-436-7900. We'll get back to Rush Hour Sports in a second here on KMOX.
Hey, just check the mail. We've been invited to a seminar and dinner is free.
Call us at 1-800-392-3709.
This is Rush Hour Sports on 104.1 FM KMOX.
All right, back in on Rush Hour Sports. Nate Gatter in for Matt Pauley tonight. I'm Kevin Wheeler, and we're talking about labor stuff. Now, what's interesting to me is that the labor stuff, as we touched on this last night, Nate, it is going to have some impact on what's happening this offseason, although I don't think it needs to have any real impact, right? I think a lot of teams will use it as an excuse to do nothing. I don't think it should be really that way, because if you look back to the last time we had the lockout, just before the lockout, right around that time, I mean, the Rangers were throwing money around, right? They signed Corey Seager. They threw a bunch of money at a couple of different guys. Marcus Semien, I think, was around that same time. So they kind of show you that it's not necessary to cut it back or do anything like that. And these owners probably have a good idea of roughly what the new system will look like, right? Like, they know if we get a total victory, it's this. If we get a compromise, it's this. And they
probably have a better gauge than almost anyone on the likelihood of a lockout, and in particular, what the really important question, which is the likelihood of a lockout that reduces the number of games that are played in 2027.
You just in saying that, you just hit a thing that's just driving me crazy with a lot of the baseball insiders, and I love them all, man. I love the national guys. I mean, I know most of them, not all, but. And I like them all, but they do this. They get overly dramatic. Like, it is 100% guaranteed to be a lockout. Okay, but nobody really cares if you're locked out now.
Right. The players are functionally locked out right now anyway.
If you lock out like right after the World Series, okay, it takes away the fun of free agency. What we really care about is whether or not games are lost.
I don't think any guys are knocking on the door at knocking on the gates at Busch Stadium like, let me in, please.
I mean, just so long as no games are lost, everything's okay. People forgive. There's a big gap between what happened in 94 and what happened in 2021, right? 2021, we got a late start, but we played a season. It was normal. You had a World Series. 1994 was the worst disaster that could hit a sport. You lost a World Series. You lost a championship and blew out, 40% of a season, and it lasted into the next season. I don't see them ever doing that again. For a lot of the reasons before the show, you and I were kicking some of this around, and you made a bunch of good points about it. Like, this is a really bad time to pick a fight because you're trending upward. And why send that rolling back down the hill? Because you're trending upward in ratings. This was the most watched World Series in 40 years. And maybe that's the question too, Nate. I know that this will not make fans in Pittsburgh happy. Probably doesn't make Cardinals fans happy. But the sport could look at this and say, okay, is it worth it for fans in these smaller markets to be pissed off all the time if we're getting these kinds of television audiences, if we're getting these kinds of ratings, if we're making this kind of revenue?
And the answer is unquestionably yes. I mean, the NBA has answered that question, and they've answered it emphatically yes.
Yeah, they're right.
Right.
You're
the league, I'm not necessarily, it's not a conspiracy theory or anything. I'm not saying the league actively puts its thumb on the scale, but the league does not mind that it's set up in such a way now, especially because of the amount of agency that players have, that hugely favors the biggest markets, right? Not always, right? Every once in a while, a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, through a once in a lifetime, once in a
why was that even possible though?
Comes along where
why that
they
was
happen
possible?
to have the best player of the generation who's born and raised in Cleveland.
Because LeBron's from Akron.
Right. And so all of a sudden they become one of the haves
right.
for like a decade, right? But even now, as Cleveland's gotten good again, they've had to do it in a small market way, right? They've had to acquire a guy from another small market in a trade who was kind of chill and willing to sign
I'm a Pistons fan,
okay?
But Detroit's a big market.
Yes.
It's been a long time.
I think Detroit.
Now they're getting good now, but look how long it took.
This has very little to do with sports.
15 years.
I was talking to my wife about this the other day. I think Detroit is maybe the most missized city in the mind of the average American.
Yeah.
Right? I think the average American puts Detroit in the bucket with St. Louis and Kansas City and Cincinnati.
Quite a bit bigger.
It is massively bigger. Spend one trip, go through the Detroit airport, and you'll find out just how different Detroit is from some of these other Midwestern cities.
Yeah. So I mean, even places like that, and in other places in the NBA marketplace. And look how long
because it's really not about market size; it's about market sex appeal.
Right.
When you have that much, it's
look
about
at Dallas.
If you were a 20-something-year-old making $30 million, would you rather live in Detroit or Miami? Would
Yeah.
you rather live in, New York or Sacramento, right? Like those are the questions. And now that's a bad example because that is market size. But you could do Detroit against cities that are similarly or smaller size.
Yeah, I mean,
and you could do that same kind of analysis.
Yeah. And it's part of the challenge of what's going on here too. There are other things because, we didn't get to that part yet on setting the floor, but I think we know the floor can't really change in a meaningful way without really close to full revenue sharing. Like we take all of the local money and we put it in a pool and then we divide it. Or maybe there's a way, and we'll get to this on the other side of the news. On the other side of the news, we'll talk about this. Maybe there's a way where every team keeps a certain percentage of their local revenue and then the rest is put into a big bucket and then they all share that. Short of that, no cap or floor system changes anything. Nope. That's Nate Gatter. I'm Kevin Wheeler. Stick around. It's Rush Hour Sports on KMOX.
Hey, this is Charlie Brennan. Have you noticed loose bricks
morning. Ooh, where'd you get your...
Windshield wipers. eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying. Just beautiful.
Millions of finds, each with a story. eBay. Things people love.
Rush Hour Sports continues on 104.1 FM, KMOX.
All right, Rush Hour Sports on a Tuesday night. Nate Gatter in for Matt Pauley tonight. Kevin Wheeler with you here as usual. Feel free to join us on the stream if you'd like. Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We're going strong there. Feel free to toss in a thought if you have one. We're doing a lot of baseball tonight. The GM meetings are going on, and it's a little bit of a slow roll there. I did see a couple things today that were interesting. Jeff Passan made a suggestion that the Cleveland Guardians should try to trade for Brendan Donovan, which I thought was interesting. There's a lot of interesting reasons for it in his explanation. One is that Donovan gives them a good, consistent bat that they could use really wherever they need somebody. Like they need a second baseman. But if they were to trade Stephen Kwan, he could also slide to left field. And Rob Serfolio, who is one of the guys working underneath Chaim Bloom, came from Cleveland. So he knows their farm system. So I thought Jeff did a really nice job there of kind of connecting some dots. So we'll keep an eye on those types of things. I think tomorrow night, Matt Pauley will be out again tomorrow night. I'm going to do Sports Up Online tomorrow night. I'm going to try to get Derek Gould to join from Las Vegas from the GM meetings, and we'll see if we have any new information by then. But today, Nate and I were talking about the upcoming labor battle and, whether or not it's even sensible to have it. Because really what it all comes down to, Nate, as you and I have talked about a couple times now, not just tonight, but in previous times, is that it comes down to finding a better revenue sharing plan. And what I think is maybe more interesting than the Players Association versus the owners, that'll be a battle that we see play out in public, and they're going to be lobbing grenades at each other and all of that. I think the more interesting stuff is what's going to be happening within those groups. How is the debate going within the owners when you have the smaller market teams going, guys, you got to help make up the gap here. We're partners. You need all 30 teams to have a league. And this league, by the way, is talking about expanding. They're going to do it. They will expand by 2 teams at some point in the next 5 years. We don't know when exactly, but we know that that's the plan. Manfred has said so. His plan was once you got Tampa Bay settled, and they're getting a new stadium, once you got the A settled, they're moving to Vegas. They were going to start looking at expansion, and they're doing that. So that's coming soon. How are you going to, if you're looking at it from those owners that are like, well, wait a minute, we don't have the revenues to keep up. And then you got to convince the top guys to share more. And do they want to? Do the Yankees or the Dodgers want to give up their advantage? I would think not. So I find that back and forth. And as you pointed out, Nate, the back and forth within the Players Association. The vast majority of the players aren't stars making a ton of money.
Right. I mean, the overwhelming majority.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's going to come down to straight votes of various kinds in the players' union. So I actually think the main thing we were talking about during the break is I think that the players' union probably would be more, if we could get to a world where there was going to be a lot of revenue sharing and there was going to be a relatively high floor to go with the cap, I think the owners would find not more than they expect, because I'm sure they've thought that they've gamed this out, but that the players union, maybe more than the typical fan expects, the players union would be open to that as a solution, because most of the players union doesn't care that much if Bryce Harper is able to make 30 million or 35 million or 40 million, right? They're perfectly happy. Or if Ohtani has to settle for the next Ohtani, to the extent there is one, has to settle for 50 instead of 70, right? Your guys in the mid tier, let alone your guys making the league minimum, are really not concerned about that. But if in this scenario, that's what you do, is the carrot. One of the carrots would be the league minimum is going to go up a couple $100,000, right? Let's say now if you're a major leaguer, you're making $1 million a year, period.
Right.
Nobody's making under seven figures. It's like 758, whatever it is now.
Yeah.
It's gone up a lot, to be fair. I mean, it was 500-ish that long ago. So it's already been going up a lot. But you throw them a carrot at the bottom end to further entice those votes. Those guys aren't voting in solidarity with the dudes making $30+ million a year. Not that they don't want those guys to do it. Some of those guys fancy themselves that player in the future, right? Paul Skeens thinks of himself much more as a $30 million, well, really a $40 or $50 million a year player than he does a league minimum guy, even if he's technically a league minimum guy right now, right? He knows he's going to be, if he stays healthy or even close to healthy, he's going to be one of those ultra high earners. But most of those guys are not envisioning, they're smart enough to know their career is unlikely to lead to a $30 million a year contract.
Yeah, but how many of those young guys, which, by the way, make up a large percentage of the lowest paid guys, a lot of them look at it and go, I'm just biding my time till I can get that contract in there.
Probably some.
I think there's a lot.
Guys who are relief pitchers, I don't think so.
No.
You've got to be top-end players, and you've pretty much got to be a starting pitcher or an elite bat. Those are the only ways that you're getting to that kind of territory, kind of air where it's going to make a difference.
Which way are you voting if you're Paul Skeens when you're a rookie?
Right.
Which way are you voting if you're a rookie of the year candidate?
Right. If you're Paul Skeens, if you're Mason Wynn, you're thinking about voting against.
Yeah.
But still, that's going to be at best or at worst, depending on your perspective, 80% of the young guys are voting for.
Yeah, I think the problem is not the rationality; it's the delusion. Is that they all every guy that plays thinks they're better than they are.
Now we're talking about a bigger picture of American society, about how everybody's voting, thinking about the day they're going to make $2 million a year. They're going to be a billionaire.
It's not wrong.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. In fact, and it might even be more prevalent within the sports world because they can see how immediate it is. Right? It's their teammate literally across the locker room, and they can see where that path is. But it is an interesting back and forth. That maybe the most interesting battles in this will be within each team rather than this is what I never understand. Okay. We can all sit here and look at this and say the real battles here are within each group. The battles really shouldn't be one group yelling at the other. It shouldn't be the owners complaining about what players make and I hate when owners try to solve owner problems by making the players the solution. Like it's such a disingenuous thing. The gap between the Dodgers and the Pirates does not exist because of the players' union. It doesn't. It exists because LA's bigger than Pittsburgh.
Right.
It's like it's not complicated. It has nothing to do with the players. Why is it the players' problem to solve?
I mean, I hear you.
And here's why.
The reason
because the rich guys don't want to give up what they got.
Well, and in theory, it's both parties' problem to solve, and they both give up some of what they got because they both benefit. And that's where it's going to fall apart. Is that the Dodgers would have to give up so much to make this work, and it's very unlikely. As far as the Dodgers are concerned, baseball is pretty damn healthy right now. Right. Baseball is serving the Dodgers just fine. How much healthier could baseball get to the point that the Dodgers having to give away potentially tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year between what they want to spend on their team and can't and what they have to revenue share to the smaller teams? How much would they have to get back before that's a good investment for them? It's almost impossible. Baseball would have to grow enormously for the Dodgers to be making money in a way that would make sense, right? One of the things we're going to talk about here at the end is if you wanted a path there toward this kind of revenue sharing, it would almost certainly have to involve a singular TV setup, right? It would have to involve the streamlining of TV rights where not only all national rights, which are already in the hands of the league, but also all local rights would have to be in the hands of the league in the way that it is for the NFL. Now, the NFL doesn't have strict delineations between national and local rights, but the NFL controls 100% of the TV product that goes from any NFL team, with the exception of preseason. That's the only place where the NFL has actual local TV deals that exist. So Major League Baseball would need to do that. And then they could sell, for example, the amount of money Major League Baseball could make from an ESPN or another similarly motivated streamer would be astronomical if they could sell them every single game for every single team. Yeah. Right. What was the power? How much could you sell MLB TV for?
It won't be one, I wouldn't think, because the NFL's not one. The NFL's got 5 different TV partners.
Sure. But what ESPN would want is we want MLB TV, but we want every team. And we want no blackouts, with the one exception being, same as what it would be for Sunday Ticket, other nationally available games, right? We want every local game for every team.
Right. So
basically the way that Sunday Ticket is, every out-of-market game.
And you're going to sell, quote-unquote, primetime games to the other networks, Monday Night Baseball, Sunday Night Baseball,
and
whatever.
And those will be not included in your Sunday Ticket
different
equivalent.
Also. Right. Playoffs would be
exactly. It's exactly like Sunday Ticket, where you're paying, and for Sunday Ticket, people pay an enormous price for now 18 Sundays and those are 6 hours basically of you're getting out of those 18 Sundays, maybe 7 hours you're getting out of those 18 Sundays. So people are paying that price, even if they watch every hour, every Sunday, for barely 100 hours worth, somewhere around 100 of football. And most of that is going to go unwatched, right? Because you can only watch I guess some people will have a bunch of screens. And
Unless
you can
I can
watch
tell you right now, I used
to
to flip a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have the ticket now because it's not worth it because I have conflicts, but yeah.
Right. So it's a huge price. Now, I think baseball wouldn't be able to command anywhere near the price on an hourly basis or a per game basis, obviously, because it's just a different sport. But that's an enormous amount of inventory that stretches over a very long period of the year. And it would be hugely desirable to a number of different networks and streaming services. And ESPN in particular has made it very clear they've coveted that kind of arrangement for a long time because of what it would do for their, previously ESPN Plus. Now they're sort of ESPN all-in streaming service that's sort of nebulously branded.
Yeah.
That would be a game changer. But the huge complicating factor there is that not only are you dealing with teams that might just not want a revenue share, but you're also dealing with some of those big teams that won't want a revenue share that own some or all of the networks that they're on, right? The Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs, the Red Sox, who all have stakes in their local networks or own them outright. What does that look like, right?
Well,
what does it look like if the Cubs
MLB
and the
can
Yankees,
cut them a check.
Right, if MLB is going to have to buy out Yes Network for the Yankees, which, by the way, airs a bunch of stuff other than the Yankees.
Yeah.
Right, there's a lot. Does MLB want to be in the business of doing like Jets shoulder programming? Who knows?
Maybe.
Marquee, where the Cubs play.
Yeah.
What does that look like if MLB is trying to buy Marquee Sports Network?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the most, it's still impractical, but if you wanted to find a route, it would be MLB finds a way to bring all 30 teams rights ownership to where MLB, the league, owns 100% of the TV rights.
And if I'm the Yankees and Dodgers, good luck convincing me to go along.
Right. Very unlikely. But if they could get it.
So here's what I'm going to do.
It's one of the
I'm going to give up my competitive advantage and my financial advantage. And what do I get out of it?
Right. And it's not like, MLB doesn't just have they have it, I guess, kind of, but the league can't just unilaterally be spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to try to buy out all these networks.
Guess where they could do that, though? You get the expansion fees from the new franchises.
Potentially.
And maybe those teams get bigger chunks as a means of doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of ways that they can raise revenue, including adding 2 new franchises, which also adds new marketplaces to increase the value of your TV deals and sell more tickets and do all those kind of things. I think that's probably going to be a big part of it. All right, we got to take a quick time out. We come back, we'll wrap this show up. Nate's got Sports Open Line for you coming up after the 6 o'clock news. We get a tease on that and wrap this discussion next.
If you owe the IRS, you have a legal issue, and you need the Lance Drury Law Firm. We'll protect your rights. Log on at lancedrurylaw.com.
Hey, I'm Mike Slater. My dad passed away at the age of 6.
joins to perform Khachaturian's shimmering piano concerto. November 21st and 22nd at Powell Hall at the Jack C. Taylor Music Center. Tickets at slso.org.
This is Rush Hour Sports on 104.1 FM KMOX.
All right, getting ready to wrap up Rush Hour Sports. Nate Gatter in for Matt Pauley tonight. I'm Kevin Wheeler. What do you got on Sports Open Line tonight?
Pretty exciting, actually. Josh Schertz,
Nice.
head coach of the Billikens, is going to join us. They're off to that 3-0 start. He's going to be our first guest at 6:20. Amy Markscores will join us, as she does every Tuesday
Hockey
evening
Amy.
now to talk
She's
about
known
the
as
Blues.
Hockey Amy now.
Yes, yeah, thank God, too, because somebody's got to be the hockey
I'm
guy
glad
around here.
I like Amy Markscores. I like Hockey Amy, too.
Yeah.
I'm glad they're both around.
So, how different are they? That's the question. This is going to be my first taste of hockey, Amy.
No, it's not any different. It's fun. Amy does a great job.
We're going to talk a little bit about the now several days old story of Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, the Cleveland relievers getting indicted. We're going to visit with Jen Cease, talk a little St. Louis City. They hired a new sporting director recently. So that, I take my opportunities when I'm hosting Sports Open Line,
right?
Kevin, it's anything in the last week or so qualifies as topical, because anything that I've had a thought about in the last week, we're going to get that in.
Yeah, well, you don't know when the next perfect timing is going to be, right?
Exactly.
Go get it. Yeah, go get it. All right, before we get done, any last remnants from this conversation that you want to get through? Because to me, I think what we've outlined is the simplicity of the complexity in that there's internal decision that's going to be need to be made. Big markets are going to have to compromise. If they don't, nothing will change. And then from there, you can go to the players and say, we want this, and then you can find ways to balance it out. I hate caps for one reason. I hate the restrictive nature of like player movement. It makes trades way harder. Especially like the NHL. It's a little easier in the NBA because they have trade exceptions. They got all kinds of little tweaks. I think the NBA's kind of got it right.
The NBA has
They have a lot of ways to, hometown stars can get more money by staying home. Like, I like a lot of what they do. Maybe we could steal a few of those ideas, but generally caps annoy me because you can get stuck. And now what do? You can't decide, hey, we're going to go above our budget for a few years to get better. You're just like, well, we're just here.
Right. They have an inaccessibility for fans, right? I think MLS is a perfect example of that. Speaking of St. Louis City, I mean, the MLS salary cap and roster rules is so convoluted that there have been executives in MLS who don't completely understand it, to the detriment of their teams, right? It's sort of a notorious concern that teams have when bringing in outsiders, especially European sporting directors who have or other executives who have no experience in MLS, you're going to need a real crash course here. This is going to be a college level course in what the heck has been set up here. So I hear what you're saying in terms of the inaccessibility, and that's where the NBA has a cap that is on the basic level very simple, in part because they have few players.
But how is anybody under the cap?
Right. Nobody. And so for that reason, it's also a little bit simpler for fans in that it's relatively rare that a team in the NBA has to do something for no reason other than the cap.
Right.
Whereas in the NFL, I think even though the cap's a little fake and, they put in dead years and all that kind of stuff to punt things, teams like the New Orleans Saints, for example, the way they ultimately did have to pay the piper, like in the NFL, all you can really do is kick the can down the road. Sooner or later, you get to the can and you can't kick it again. It's filled with cement now, and you just got to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I am overall, if there was a way to get there, and I'm not saying there is, on a theoretical level, I am very much in favor of some kind of cap and floor. Not because I hate the players, not because I think it's bad for a guy to get a lot of money. Like, I understand that one of the only downsides with the NBA system is that essentially, by definition, a player on a max contract who is by rule limited in his earning potential is underpaid, right? Unless he happens to be worth on an open market exactly what the maximum salary is that he can make, he is definitionally underpaid because he's bumping up against the ceiling. I get that. That's not great. But I think the overall benefits, especially when you account for the fact that I think the players as a collective unit could make the same or probably more money in that scenario, I'm willing to stomach the degree to which it is anti-labor. And I'm not completely, waving that away, but I'm willing to stomach that in exchange for, I think, just such a greater investment and engagement from fans in those smaller markets. And it just kills me as a baseball fan to see those kind of historic baseball markets in Pittsburgh, in Cincinnati, in Kansas City, at times in Cleveland and Detroit, where they're just so many of the fans feel disenchanted. They feel disenfranchised to the degree that makes sense here. That's kind of the sentiment, is they feel left out of the process. They feel like their team has been left behind. And that really does crush me. And so I hope we could, if only for that, if only so that then if the Pittsburgh Pirates were in last place, we could say it's your own damn fault. That would be nice. You know, and I think most Pirates fans recognize that, right? They chant sell the team. They hate Bob Nutting more than anybody else does. Nobody needs to tell them that they have an owner who doesn't spend enough on the team, but it'd be nice to just take one layer of that problem away.
Yeah. I also think they maybe need to relook at their own histories, because the Royals were basically the farm team for the Yankees for 40 years.
I get it. I get it.
And that was before big money. Just one of those weird.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm a romantic about the small markets,
I get
Kevin.
you. Oh, I get you.
Do what you will.
I get you, man. Have fun tonight.
I will.
Sports Open Line's coming up after the news with Nate Gatter here on KMOX.
Honey, is our car still under warranty?
No, not anymore.
My
In Florissant and downtown at the Arch, we're at 51 degrees. I'm Maria Kina, KMOX News.
Come on, let's get going now.
From KMOX Sports.
We're primed and ready. All day, baby. Man, let's go.
This is the Gray Bar Sports Open Live. Gray Bar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. On 104.1 FM, KMOX.
Gray Bar Sports Open Live this evening on KMOX. Nate Gatter with you in for Matt Pauley. And we will be talking sports until 8 o'clock this evening. We got a fun show coming up. Producer Kyle Sixta is with me in our downtown studio. Josh Schertz, the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team, will be with us. He's coming up in just about 10 minutes here on KMOX. Talk about the Billikens 3-0 start. Certainly there's been some good back-to-back 100-point outings. First time in program history St. Louis has ever scored 100 points or more in back-to-back games, including a Chaifetz Arena record 66 points in the second half last night of a 199-66 win over Lindenwood. That's 109-66 over Lindenwood. But on the other hand, the Billikens turned the ball over 20 times last night, including 16 of them in the first half. And they have 50 turnovers in just 3 games. That puts them 325th in the country out of 350-odd teams that are in Division I. So there are certainly some things to work on there for the Billikens, and Josh Schertz has been very clear about that. He has not always loved the way the offense is run. There have been times when he has been had concern about the selfishness. Certainly he's been concerned about the turnovers, but we saw this last year, and we'll talk about this, that his system is sometimes one of enough nuance that it's a little bit difficult for kids to pick it up right away. And unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, it doesn't really matter. For better or worse, we live in a world where there's tremendously more turnover now in college basketball rosters from year to year than there was, even 5 or 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago. And as a result, systems have to be within the ability of kids to pick them up more quickly, because you can't rely on veterans who are going to be in the program for 2, 3, 4 years necessarily, because you just don't have very many of those guys. As it is right now, Robbie Avila is really the only guy who's been with Josh Schertz for more than 2 years, because he was with him at Indiana State and now in his second year with him here in St. Louis. So we'll talk to Coach Schertz about that, and maybe if he has made changes, if so, what kind of adjustments he's made, what's different about coaching a team in the portal era, especially as somebody who's known as more of an X's and O's guy who's a little bit sophisticated at the offensive end of the floor. We'll talk to Amy Marks-Kors about the St. Louis Blues. Hockey Amy, as Kevin Wheeler said, at 6:35. That is not quite such a good start. Just 5 wins out of 16 for the Blues, though hardly insurmountable at this point. They are at the bottom in 8th place in the Central Division, but they're only 6 points behind the Blackhawks, who are in 3rd place, which is that last spot that would be guaranteed into the playoffs with the top 3 from the division. So certainly the Blues have not done enough yet to put themselves fully behind the 8 ball, but they have cut their work out for the remainder of the season at this point. We talked about this a little bit in a baseball context at times with Kevin Wheeler, that it's really about how you've changed the rest of the season. Right. Put it in a football context, because there are fewer games, so it's easier. If you start the season, let's say you need to go 10-7 to make the playoffs in the NFL. If you start the season 3-0, well, now you only need to go 7-7. That what you get for that work is you only need to be 500 the rest of the way to still make the playoffs, when before the season thought you were going to have to win 10 out of 17 games. The Blues are kind of in that situation now. If you put a number on here's how many wins, here's how many points the Blues are going to need before the season, and therefore here's how many points per game they need, that points per game number has gone up considerably. There's no way around that. But it's also not at all insurmountable, only 16 games into the season. St. Louis City hired sporting director Corey Ray last week. He's going to be waiting on a work permit because he's Canadian, but we'll talk about him, the first new sporting director in St. Louis City history, the 2nd overall. Lutz Pfannenstiel let go during this past season. I think it was in August that they made his departure official. Corey Ray, very successful as the general manager of Columbus Crew 2, the second team in Columbus, where he was the 2022 MLS Next Pro Executive of the Year, spent time as an assistant GM in Toronto, and then had kind of a more nebulous role most recently in Montreal, where he handled soccer-related stuff. He wasn't necessarily the final decision maker. It was a little bit unclear exactly the technicalities of that role. But Ray now in St. Louis as the sporting director. Of course, the team's still without a head coach. We'll talk about Ray's addition. We'll talk about the head coach search. We'll talk about contracts, guys coming back, guys not coming back with Jen Cease in the second hour. We're going to talk about a few other things as well without guests, one of them being the two Cleveland Guardians relief pitchers, most notably all-star closer Emmanuel Clase, indicted on gambling-related charges this week in the Eastern District of New York, and kind of what that says about them, what kind of decision-making was going on there, and the changes that we are already seeing in baseball and that we're likely to see over the long term with a lot of these kind of gambling-related investigations unfolding around sports. Little Mizzou football as well. The Tigers coming off a 3-touchdown loss to Texas A&M over the weekend, a third loss this season. Certainly it eliminates Mizzou for all intents and purposes from the college football playoff conversation. But at the same time, it's been a season full of adversity for Missouri this year, down to starting Matt Zollers, his first career start, the true freshman third-string quarterback, because of the opener injury to Sam Horn, who would have been likely slated to be the backup, but was still at the time engaged in a quarterback competition with Bo Pribula, and then the dislocated ankle that Pribula suffered against Vanderbilt in Missouri's very disappointing loss down in Nashville a couple of weeks ago that certainly ended his regular season, likely ended his 2025 altogether, and is at least part of the reason Missouri lost to the undefeated Aggies of Texas A&M, but probably not the only reason. Pretty unlikely that even with a healthy Pribula, Missouri's overcoming that sort of deficit to win against A&M this weekend. All of that and more is coming up on Gray Bar Sports Open Line this evening. Josh Schertz, the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team, will be with us after the break on KMOX.
Since we have lawyers in all 50 states, I see and hear lots of lawyer ads. It seems that most are
wustl.edu.
This is Mayor Kara Spencer. Congratulations, KMOX, on 100 years of great service to the St. Louis region.
Tried to beat him into the front court, couldn't, and it scoops it up for Kellen Thames. Flight 0, takeoff, jam time!
Did he go reverse? He went reverse?
Well, he went up with the left hand and kind of spun as he got there.
That was our own Bob Ramsey and Earl Austin Jr. on the call here on KMOX during the 109-66 victory for St. Louis over Lindenwood last night. Kellen Thames back on the floor for the Billikens. Certainly everybody happy to see that. And we are happy to have the second-year head coach of the Bills, Josh Schertz, joining us now on Gray Bar Sports Open Line. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How's things with you?
We are great. Nate Gatter here in for Matt Pauley. Coach, let's start with Kellen Thames since he was the subject of that highlight. Obviously, there was so much uncertainty around his medical situation last year and when and even if he was going to be able to get back on the court. I mean, what a boost he has provided for you guys. His energy, his athleticism, his skill set. Kid's averaging 13 points in 17 minutes so far this year.
Yeah, you'll take that kind of production. I think he might be the most productive player in the country on a per-minute basis. 9 steals as well, so averaging 3 steals a night, a couple of assists a night. He just, he's such a great kid. It was obviously really heartbreaking what happened, last year. 4 games in, I think he was averaging right around 15 points and 7.5 rebounds a game and playing great basketball. And then, the cramp started with that Quinnipiac game in Game 5. He never really could recover. We shut him down in early January, but he was never the same, a shell of himself. So it's great to see him back, great to see him playing. I think the way this team is constructed really helps him because it gets him, he can play, kind of empty his tank, get a rest, come back and do it again. And then just the way that the transition, he's just so elite, on the open floor. And this team gives him an opportunity to, I think, really play to his strengths. And Kellen's a guy that, special kid and a terrific player, great competitor. And, there's no bigger roar in Chaffetz than when Kellen Thames is making a big time play. It's always awesome to see.
Yeah, certainly. Do you see this as kind of his role for the rest of the year then, where he's probably playing in somewhat shorter spurts and emptying the tank and coming back in? Or do you think there's a possibility that he, as he gets built up, could return to something more along the lines of a typical starter's kind of rotation minutes where he could push into the mid-20s or beyond?
Yeah, I think it's TBD. I think, we're just kind of like taking it as we go. Certainly the goal would be to get him up to as many minutes as he can handle. I think there's a capstone, right now where like he hits his point and we got to get him out and then he can refuel and redo his tank. And he's got to do a lot of things away from the court, in terms of his eating and hydration, not just, water, but certainly ensure that he's got, the right type of minerals and he's doing, there's a wide variety of things. He's got a lot on his plate to make sure he's getting himself ready to play. We've got a whole team working with him to make sure that happens. But the hope is that, as the season goes on, that we can add more minutes to it, and I think as the competition level raises, that hopefully the more of Kellen Thames, always the better for the Billikens.
Speaking of guys who have been off to good starts, Amari McCoughtry, an ultra-efficient 23 points last night, a career high for him. He added 9 rebounds in the win over Lindenwood. What have you seen from McCoughtry so far that you liked?
Yeah, I just think he's taken a huge step forward in his growth. He's a more mature player. He's a more confident player. He's a more, a guy more, in tune with what he needs to do to impact winning. He makes more winning plays. He's got such great feel around the basket. He's such a physical, confrontational driver. He's got the tools to be a great rebounder. I think, he shows it in spurts. Want to see him, going to the glass offensively and defensively the way he did at times last night. But his ability to attack the rim, he can finish with your hand. He's got amazing touch in and around the basket. He can pass. He does a good job of finding guys. And then defensively, his versatility, guards 1 through 5. Not only is he 6'6", he's got a 7'1" wingspan, and allows him to take on so many different challenges. And so he can touch the game in a lot of ways, similar to to Kellen, there's this great versatility for him in terms of the ability to put his fingerprints on winning and do it on both ends of the floor and in a lot of different ways. And he's as versatile, kind of our Swiss Army knife on our team in terms of all the things he's doing. He's trying to shoot the ball a little more confident. So really excited about what he's bringing to the table. And certainly, I think he's just scratching the surface of what he's going to be. He's got, there's a huge gap for him between, where he is and what he's capable of. And as that gap gets bridged, can he, do some special things.
You guys have been explosive in transition and at the offensive end of the floor so far this year. The back-to-back 100-point outings, first time in program history that's ever happened. 66 points in the second half against Lindenwood last night, a Chaffetz Arena record. You must be thrilled with how your guys are getting up and down the floor and the kind of entertaining brand of basketball that yields.
Yeah, I think our pace has been great. We've got to be at times we got to bring the organization. We talk about pace is great. But it's pace with organization, pace with discipline, pace with rhythm. That's really hard to guard. I think last night, first half we were wild with the ball. We had 43 points. We had 16 turnovers. Second half we really we ran much more coherent offense. Played every bit as fast. The goal is we want to play with unbelievable pace, and I think we've shown in all three games and in the two, Iowa and Bradley before that, that pace is hard to keep up with over a 40-minute period. Maybe first half, but second half we're seeing our ability to get in a guy's legs and we're getting some easier plays at the rim, and so. But it's continuing to play with that pace. I think it's an entertaining brand of basketball. People are seeing us, in transition. Our guys all the time, exception to maybe the end of the Chicago State game, have played exceptionally hard. They try to play the right way, and it's just continue as we move forward. Bringing that organization, bringing that discipline to the pace, which is going to allow us to really function at our highest level offensively. That's the thing with this team. You're most excited about, at least from my seat, is I think we're kind of like Amari. We're just scratching the surface of how good we can be, particularly on that end of the floor. And I think there's a lot more in terms of growth and development for us to get where we're capable of being.
You alluded to the organization. Obviously, the turnovers are part of that. 20 of them last night, 16 in the first half, 50 over the first three games. What do you see as the most important points of emphasis to kind of combine those things and continue with some of that urgency, much the way you did in the second half, to your point, with only 4 turnovers and 66 points in the second half? How do you play at high speed while also taking care of the basketball and being organized?
Yeah, it's obviously the most elusive thing, right? It's if it was easy, everybody do it. I think that's the piece of understanding spacing, understanding we don't have to, if it's not there, being okay. A lot of our turnovers last night were, we drove the ball into the teeth of defense. We could have got off the ball earlier and kicked it. We kept trying to go in the teeth of defense. Some of it is, guys trying to hit home runs, trying to make spectacular plays, understanding that singles will do it. Understanding that, as we push the ball and if the defense is back and set, then it's an opportunity to get to our motion offense and get to our flow and work the defense and break them down. And there's a difference, like I said, being fast, being careless, being fast, being reckless. Then there's no point in pace. The pace is only really effective when you have those, the organizational piece and the discipline piece and. Discipline and taking care of the ball, discipline in your shot selection. And so I think that's our big challenge. We got to go back to work. Part of it too, I think, a little bit is, as we get into playing, the competition level raises. I thought our most coherent offense of the season so far was in our first game against Iowa. And mainly because Iowa, we couldn't just, run the ball down their backs. They were able to get back and get set and they made us work. We still scored a ton of points, but we got it more through layering our offense. And I think, as the competition level raises starting Saturday night, I think our ability to layer offense, our ability to get to next actions and really work into the clock a little bit is going to be challenged. And, I'm excited to see our guys respond, and I think they will. I think we have the tools to be an elite offensive team. I mean, obviously we're averaging 103 points, but I think we can do some special things against high-level competition. I think the competition is going to help take us there.
Billikens head coach Josh Schertz is with us on KMOX. Just a couple more for you, Coach. You mentioned the motion offense and getting into it in a half court. You're known as a guy who does pretty sophisticated things at the offensive end of the floor. How much has the transfer portal and the fact that you have a lot of new players every year, and that's just going to be the world we're living in for the foreseeable future, how does that change what you do offensively or the way you have to teach it, knowing that you just have fewer guys in your huddle on day one of practice who already know what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think, the when you have, we call it corporate knowledge, but you got guys in your program, you have continuity. I think it can allow you to you still don't, you still go back to basics, but you can advance your curriculum much faster, right? Because guys understand, what they're doing. And so you're not skipping steps, but you can move through stuff quicker. Now you're still, starting at the same base point, but you got to take longer to move through it. You're not getting to the advanced curriculum stuff till later on in the season. But you're seeing, I think, that's the key part here for us, is our ability to hopefully over time retain guys. You gotta recruit a really high level. You gotta develop the players you have, and you gotta retain them. And when you look at year 2, Amari McCautry, year 2, Kellen Thames, you're seeing these guys make these jumps, and I think it's important, in that to see these guys over time are vastly improved. Kuluani is a vastly improved player, though he's redshirting. So we're seeing guys make that jump, but I think you have to meet the team where it is. This team's strengths are totally different. I've got to certainly coach it in a way that, accentuates this group's strengths, minimizes and mitigates the vulnerabilities, and tries to put us in the best position on both ends of the floor to play basketball that works for this group, which will be totally different than what worked for last year's group, because last year's group was obviously its own separate entity. So you certainly got to, can't advance the curriculum as quickly. But if you have some high IQ guys, they can maybe pick it up. And then part of it is, again, just making sure that we're doing the right things, and we'll continue to layer things on as the season goes. And so we're probably not nearly as advanced we were in my D2 days where we had everybody for 5 years. And a lot of my guys were 3rd and 4th year guys. But we're certainly, hopefully by the end of the year, going to get there.
Last one for you, kind of big picture, because you mentioned that preseason scrimmage against Iowa. And that certainly is a game that got a lot of attention around social media circles when the score was reported, maybe in part because at that stage of the year, everybody's looking for any morsel, and in part because this is a schedule that's true for a lot of kind of really high-end mid-majors like St. Louis and the Daytons and the high-end A-10 teams, where it's hard to get non-conference games against high major opponents, right? You guys are going to have one against either Minnesota or Stanford, the second game in Palm Desert the day after Thanksgiving. But other than that, there aren't any non-conference games against power conference opponents. How frustrating is it right now? Because we've heard plenty of coaches around the country talk about this. Being a team that's often where those A-10 teams are, somewhere between maybe 40 and 70 in the net rankings, those high-end A-10 teams, trying to get themselves games against power conference opposition where those schools are saying, I'm not sure we're seeing the net rating upside of playing you guys.
Yeah, it's obviously extremely frustrating. Ben and I, Ben McCullum at Iowa and I are good friends going back to our D2 days. And, Ben was happy to come here and scrimmage us, would not have been happy to come here and play us or play us in a neutral. We've talked about, we would certainly be open to neutral game or home and homes with, Missouri or any of the teams, it doesn't matter, Kansas State, you name it, we do it. But it is, what they're trying to do, which I understand. It doesn't mean it's good for the game, but, every league is trying to figure out ways to maximize their bids, and the high majors, if they can, their job is to, if the SEC is getting 14, well, the Big 10 wants to get 15 bids, and the Big 12 wants to get every team in, and the ACC and the Big East, and how do we do that? Well, the best way in their minds to do that is to freeze out the leagues like ours, like the Mountain West, like the American, where you got these. I don't know where we fit in that. I don't know if it's high major minus, mid major plus, who knows. But as best they can, freeze those leagues out. And you do that by not playing. And the way the net works, and I think that's part of where it has to be looked at is, your best pathway to getting bids at large bids is to play quad 1 and quad 4 games. And you got to win your quad 4 games by a significant amount. And then you got to, split your quad 1 games. And then, you go to your league. And so we're not getting those opportunities at the same level that it was. People say, well, years ago they played this team and this team and this team. Well, years ago we didn't have the net, and years ago is not today. And so I'd love to see them look at, recalibrating the tournament, recalibrating the metrics. We're going to try to keep working. Part of our deal is we've got to get good enough that those teams want to play us, whether that's in Chaffetz or neutral, right? We got to get good enough that people look at us and go, man, that's a quality game. So Marquette, I have some good friends with Shaka or Dusty May at Michigan or Nate Oates at Alabama, guys I'm close with, go, hey, we want to play you. And we want to play you, not just, buy you to come here, but we want to play you on a neutral or in a home and home series or a 2-for-1 series. We go there twice. We'd be open to all that. But, the high majors are doing the best they can to freeze those teams out, trying to stay in the quad 4, quad 1 and play other power 4 teams, other power 5 teams, so they don't put themselves in jeopardy of losing. And so if that Iowa game was a regular season game, that obviously, would be a much bigger difference than it being, behind closed doors. And so we saw it when I was at Indiana State in the NIT. We started off with SMU, Minnesota, Cincinnati at home, and we won all 3 of those games. And, there's a reason those teams don't go on the road and play.
I think that's probably right. Coach, we appreciate your time and your candor as always. Thanks a lot for being here.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
You too. That's Josh Schertz, the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team. And I will say the last bit that, and I'm not putting any words in his mouth. I think even if Coach Schertz thought this, he probably would be too classy to say it. There are a lot of folks in the high major conferences in Division I. This is administrators. This is coaches who have forgotten what college basketball and who have forgotten even what the NCAA tournament is about, right? Who will tell you to your face that the NCAA tournament should be expanded and that we should be getting more high major teams in, and that the goal in the NCAA tournament should be to get those little teams out as fast as possible so that we can play real basketball. That's what people want. And it's just wrong. I think that's what they want. I don't think they're lying. I don't think they're doing it deliberately to be nefarious, but they're just wrong. And a lot of people, unfortunately, at the top end of college basketball are just completely out of touch with what makes college basketball great, what in particular makes the NCAA tournament great for the average college basketball fan, and maybe even more importantly, when you get to the tournament, the casual sports fan who doesn't love college basketball, pays a little attention, and then watches in March, because everybody watches in March, because March Madness is maybe, outside of the Super Bowl, the most quintessentially American sporting event. And what makes it so great is that the minnows can beat the sharks, right? And the sharks just don't even want to be in the same water as the minnows anymore. And that's really, really frustrating. So hopefully we can find ways to take steps in the right direction. Josh Schertz with us, the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens, off to a high-scoring 3-0 start. We're late for Amy Mark scores, but she works here, so she can't really say anything about it. Amy Mark scores talking St. Louis Blues after this.
Hey, it's Debbie Monterey. If you or someone you know has a home to sell, call Gloria Lou. That's
Sunday, the Chiefs head to Denver to face the Broncos.
Sightman Cancer Center game time, 2 p.m. Sightman Cancer Center, national leaders in cancer.
The Chiefs, the Broncos. Catch all the action here on your home for Chiefs football. 104.1 FM, KMOX.
Nate Gatter back with you on Gray Bar Sports Open Line in for Matt Pauley this evening. And after we talked to Josh Schertz, head coach of the St. Louis Billikens, about his team's excellent 3-0 start, we turned to the St. Louis Blues, off to very much a not excellent start. Just 5 wins from their first 16 games, 8 losses in regulation, 3 in overtime. And that brings us to Amy Markscores, our own Amy Markscores of KMOX. You hear her with Chris Ranji during the daytime here on KMOX, and she moonlights, I was told, according to Kevin Wheeler, as Hockey Amy, her alter ego. How much truth is there to that?
There's an enormous amount of truth. It might be completely true, Nate.
That was my feeling, is that he seemed like he was telling the truth. And she's angry, Hockey Amy, because we kept her waiting about 5 minutes later than we were supposed to. So God knows what we're headed to. The Blues brought the puck tonight in about 15 minutes, maybe a little later than that, since the NHL refuses to start on time, against the Calgary Flames, the only team in the Western Conference with fewer points than the Blues so far this year. Can you kind of walk me through how the Blues have ended up in this situation where they have certainly underplayed expectations so far?
Well, we don't have a ton of time for that. No, I mean, the Blues have put themselves in this position because, as Coach Jim Montgomery has said, one, they weren't showing up to play. They were starting the games late, in the sense that why they came out of the gate flat, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean just coming out of the season flat, but the beginning of the game, the first puck drop, to the second period, the third period, and so forth. They were coming out flat. Or they would come out with a good start, score a couple of goals, and then somehow sit back on their heels. And, when you're looking at this team and the way they've had kind of an uninspired performance for most of the games, you have some good victories. Their win against the Edmonton Oilers, they looked great, and reminds you what the ceiling could be. But they've just played poorly, where at times they're scrambling in their defensive zone. At times they weren't connecting in the neutral zone with passes, so they couldn't break out. They had a lot of neutral zone turnovers. In the offensive zone, they couldn't get pucks through to the net. And so I guess if we can focus on some of the self-inflicted wounds that led to the objectively wrong call when it came to goalie interference in that last game against the Seattle Kraken, when the Blues gave up their lead with a half a second left in the game in the third period, which of course all kind of triggered all of us who watched them lose Game 7 against the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs. But you go back to that half a second when I believe there was goalie interference. I won't break it down, but it checked all the boxes. But the thing is, that's not why they lost the game. They lost the game because of failed clearing attempts. There were multiple times when the Blues in their own defensive zone could have cleared the puck, and they didn't. Jim Montgomery brought up their offensive zone blue line turnovers. Well, you hang out in the offensive zone a few seconds longer, then it doesn't come down to the wire in that sense, with the Calgary Flames able to sustain pressure in the D zone and 6-on-5. And so, it's little things. It's, like I said, messy breakouts, neutral zone turnovers. I'm not sure why, Nate, that they came out so strong in that first period and really had a dud of a second. And then in the third, played even, but gave it up.
You mentioned being a little bit triggered by that goal with half a second. I was actually watching that game from the KMOX studio in the bowels of Busch Stadium, and was, when the goal went in, was speaking live on the Cardinals radio network about something unrelated. I'm talking about the Cardinals, and had to not react to that goal going in. And it was very hard. I mean, that's probably the closest I've ever come to swearing on network radio. And I'm not saying I was right on the edge, but it could have slipped out. So, certainly we all feel that. Let's look ahead then to tonight, and obviously an opportunity playing against at home against a team that has just 4 wins so far this year out of 17. this must be the kind of game where, you're testing them against how can they start then, right? You want to see a really strong first period and asserting themselves right away rather than messing around in a game that should be winnable.
I mean, you do, right? Obviously, you want to have that good strong start. The problem is they've had a couple of good starts, and then they manage a way to give up that lead. It was just a few games ago they were up 4-0 and they lost. And so I think it goes back to this whack-a-mole where if the fans don't have confidence in the Blues' ability to win, the Blues actually don't have confidence at times on the ice. The Blues have said it's not the goaltending, right? They're like, we have left our goaltenders out to dry. And in many ways they have. They haven't given up a lot of chances in the defensive zone, but the chances they've given up have been grade A scoring chances. You might stop, let's see, what team was it where just a few games ago, I think they didn't let up a shot on goal for 11 minutes straight. But then the next 3 shots, one was an odd man rush and 2 were breakaways. I mean, and those can really come back to haunt you. And yes, the goaltending has not been great. Joel Hofer will say that. Jordan Bennington will say that. We know what their ceilings can be, and we've kind of seen the floor. We saw Hofer start to turn that around. We need Bennington to turn it around. We know he can. We saw who he can be when he won the Cup. We saw who he could be when he won the Four Nations tournament last winter. So I say that because some of these points, these pinch points where you've seen things going wrong for the Blues, they really need to tie them all up, because if you fix 3 of the 4, that 4th one can still come to bite you, and it has in several of their losses.
Amy, we appreciate it as always. Certainly an opportunity tonight. The Blues have beaten the Flames 7 times in a row and in 16 of their last 19 meetings. So if they're going to turn it around, why not start tonight, huh?
You have to start tonight, Nate.
Got to start sometime. That's for sure.
Against the very worst team at home, you have to win tonight, full stop.
Amy Markscores of KMOX with us talking Blues. Thanks a lot, Amy.
Thanks, Nate.
You can hear Amy with Chris Ranji every day right here on KMOX. We'll take a break. When we return, we'll wrap up this first hour talking a little bit about the St. Louis City app introducing AI. If you didn't see that, we'll touch on that. And then we'll get ahead into the second hour. We'll talk real St. Louis City with Jen Cease, Mizzou football, Cleveland Guardians pitchers indicted, all that and more. Sports Open Line here on KMOX.
This fall, get a taste of what's to come at Dragonstone and exclusive
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG.
Welcome back to the Gray Bar Sports Open Line. Once again, Matt Pauley on KMOX.
Once again, Nate Gatter on KMOX filling in for Matt Pauley on Gray Bar Sports Open Line this evening. If you missed anything from this first hour, including our visits with Amy Markscores talking St. Louis Blues and with the head coach of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team, Josh Schertz, talking about his 3-0 ball club coming off a 109-66 win over Lindenwood. You can go back and hear that on the free Odyssey app, or you can always hear us streaming live. You can also use that talkback feature to get in touch. You can tweet us, you can call us, you can comment on our streams, you can do anything you want to get involved in the conversation. That conversation now has taken us to St. Louis City's app, which you've probably used if you've gone to a game. It's a place where they have tickets. You can order food. You can get directions around the stadium, what have you. Last week, St. Louis City announced the addition of ACE, an ambient AI engine, to the City app. And this would be pretty innocuous, right? Everybody's getting into AI. That's the thing that we all want to do to prove that we're hip and technologically advanced and whatever. Except that this is coming from the most environmentally friendly club in St. Louis that can't stop talking about how environmentally friendly they are. Environmental damage from AI is difficult to quantify, but scientists at University of California, Riverside estimated each 100-word AI prompt is estimated to use approximately 1 bottle of water. As a result, AI data centers consume millions or even billions of gallons of valuable fresh water every year, depending on the size of the data center. Certainly, collectively, they consume billions and billions. And this is coming from St. Louis City, a club that has touted its Goal Zero sustainability mission that commits to zero waste at Energizer Park, eliminating single-use plastics in their food and beverage packaging, even using low-flow toilets to conserve water. This is coming from St. Louis City, the club that offered to sell you a team mug from Yeti. By the way, the capital O official sustainability partner of the club for $80 for the stated purpose of reducing waste. What is the use case for this AI? City already has an app. Who do the city marketing people think is the audience for this? The audience that supposedly uses a team app, wants it to tell them where to buy food and where to find a bathroom and who will be in the starting 11, but who doesn't know how to click a button to find that information and instead has to type a full sentence in to ask an AI. It is not quicker. It is not easier. It is not more intuitive for a less than tech-savvy older fan. It is just blindly following a vapid corporate buzzword to seem cutting edge. And St. Louis City, of all teams, should be ashamed. Second hour after this on KMOX.
This is the story of the one.
Please drop off a check payable to Heat Up St. Louis to any Commerce Bank associate. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Gray Bar Sports Open Line. Once again, Matt Pauley on KMOX.
Gray Bar Sports Open Line continues on this Tuesday evening. Nate Gatter back with you in for Matt Pauley this evening. Kevin Wheeler will have you tomorrow. I'll be back with you for Thursday night Gray Bar Sports Open Line. If you missed anything, you can go back and hear it on the free Odyssey app. Josh Schertz, Amy Markscore joined us in the first hour talking Billikens and Blues, respectively. In the second hour, we're going to talk to Jen Cease here in just about 10 minutes on St. Louis City, hiring new sporting director Corey Ray, as well as some of the other events going on around the club. We'll also talk some Mizzou football later on in this second hour as well. Nate Gatter, producer Kyle Sixto back with you here on 104.1 FM KMOX. Mentioned the Cleveland Guardians relief pitchers who were indicted this week. Those indictments were announced on Sunday by the Eastern District of New York. Luis L. Ortiz and most notably Emmanuel Clase of the Cleveland Guardians. Clase, a three-time All-Star, two-time American League Reliever of the Year. Clase in particular provided lots of material, non-public information to some betting co-conspirators who actually placed the bets, who were reportedly from the native Dominican Republic of both Clase and Ortiz. In Clase's instance, the information in total, combined with the more significant allegations having to do with the essentially purposely throwing balls in order to help those bettors win bets, totaled about $400,000 of winnings for the bettors through those fraudulent wagers. Clase would, and Ortiz would, although toward the end, he really came into it just as they were getting caught, which is a bad time to come into, as they say in The Wire, a criminal effing conspiracy, which is exactly what was happening between these guys. So Clase would relatively routinely in April, May, and June, according to the indictment, purposely throw either a ball or purposely throw a ball that was either a fastball or a breaking ball so that the bettors could bet on it to be a ball, or in some cases could parlay the bet, meaning they would bet on it to be a ball and to be above or below a certain velocity. And you can bet quite a great deal of money on these particular pitches. And he would always do it on the first pitch of an inning, making it easy for the bettors to know it was coming and to have time to get their bets in, and that sort of thing. Already, Major League Baseball has responded to this, sportsbook, coordinating with major sports books in the country to limit pitch wagers to $200 at most, meaning no one could bet more than $200 on a specific pitch. So presumably now this would not be worth enough money. Although it sounds like Clase was getting relatively low. There weren't particular bribe figures thrown out on the pitches that Clase was throwing, but we did get them in the indictment relating to Ortiz's pitches. That Ortiz was getting $5,000 a couple of different times, and Clase was getting $7,000 for helping to set it up. So, or once it was $5,000 and once they both got $7,000, I should say. Once they both got $5,000, once they both got $7,000. So for those two pitches, $12,000. Even if Clase did this another dozen times, another 24 times, you know, the bettors, if they won $400,000, they're only going to give him so big a cut of that, right? They got to get the majority of it to make it worth what they're doing. So, but let's say at the absolute maximum, Clase got half of the overall winnings and he got $200,000. Emmanuel Clase just threw away his entire career and quite possibly his freedom, because they're both facing up to 65 years in federal prison. Now, it's very unlikely they would serve anything close to that. In most cases in the federal system, defendants will get plea deals because it's very rare, as Chauncey Billups is finding out, as Terry Rozier might find out, although his situation is a little bit different. It's very rare for federal prosecutors to bring charges they aren't 100% confident in. Normally, it's about strategy of plea deal and exchanging information more so than it is making some kind of argument at a trial and getting an acquittal. There are rare circumstances, but it is very rare in federal court that a criminal defendant goes to court and is acquitted. So these guys are innocent until proven guilty. The prosecutors themselves would tell you that. But it is very unusual that federal prosecutors don't get their guys post-indictment in this kind of a situation. So it is enormously likely that Emmanuel Clase threw away his career. It is more likely than not, certainly, that he will serve some time in prison in order to make at most a couple $100,000. Probably not even that. But let's say low six figures, somewhere in there, is what he probably made out of this. He's made almost $15.4 million in his career. He made $4.5 million this year. He had an additional $8 million in money that was guaranteed to him, now no longer will be. Difficult to estimate exactly when he would have been a free agent and what his earnings would have been because the Guardians had 2 team options on the back end. So it was $6 million for next year, and then there were 2 additional team options. And the reason I say it was $8 million guaranteed is because to buy out those options, they would have owed him $2 million. And those options weren't even set in value because they had to do with performance incentives. But he would have made at least $8 million more. And those options likely would have been picked up barring some kind of catastrophic arm injury because Clase has been the best relief pitcher in all of baseball over the last few years. And they would have been worth at least $10 million a year. So it's safe to say that he had in close to guaranteed money another 25 to 30 million coming over the next 3 years. And then he would have been a free agent still in his early 30s and likely to command, if he pitched anywhere close to this level, a probably $100 million-ish contract, give or take, right? Depending on the number of years. If he were a free agent this offseason, it'd be at least $100 million that he would command because he'd command at least a 5-year contract, potentially longer than that. So we're talking about a guy here who at an absolute guaranteed minimum threw away $8 million. In likelihood, threw away between 100 and 150 million, maybe even more, to get most likely $100,000 to $200,000 in illegal bribes to throw first pitch balls. Some of the most damning evidence, by the way, if you didn't read the indictment or the stories about it, is when Clase threw a slider in the dirt on a first pitch to Andy Pages of the Dodgers, who swung at it. And one of the alleged co-conspirator bettors, who supposedly lost $4,000 on that pitch, texted Clase some unsavory emojis, basically saying what a shame that was. And Clase responded with apparently a crying dog face. So he was very disappointed, although this is a game where he didn't pitch badly and Cleveland won the game. So unclear why he would have been so sad, unless obviously the feds know what they're talking about. And Clase did, in fact, do that stuff. So I think it's just kind of sad and pathetic. You wonder about what it says about the future of sports gambling in this country, which I think was a big mistake. And I think some folks are realizing that. And the response you get, usually from people who are thousands of dollars in deep with these various sports books, is that, well, folks would just do it under the table, right? Like this is makes it actually better because folks are getting caught because we have regulated sports books. And in some certain instances, that might be true. When you're talking about like college basketball and the mob, right? Because we had instances where the mob was getting involved in trying to fix college basketball games well before sports gambling was legal in the United States. So maybe you can make that argument in certain instances. In the vast majority of instances, this is people who never would be betting with an illegal mob bookie or finding some offshore sports book to gamble at. The reason they're getting into sports gambling and the reason they're then getting down this road that leads to fraud and criminality is because it's legal now. And so it's right in front of them because it's advertised all the time on billboards, because there are official sports books of Major League Baseball or because the St. Louis Cardinals and the Kansas City Chiefs and every sports team and their mother want to build some kind of mixed use casino sportsbook facility where they can make even more money off of you. Right? This is why it's grown. We were not talking about it in this way before sports gambling was legal in the United States. And it's not because a bunch of Emmanuel Class A's were out there spiking sliders for the mob, right? That wasn't happening because an illegal sports book offshore or through the mob is not giving you odds per pitch. They're not saying, yeah, you can bet $4,000 with me on Emmanuel Class A to throw a first pitch ball. Because if you're looking for a mob bookie to bet on Emmanuel Class A to throw a first pitch ball, it's because you know he's going to throw a first pitch ball. The only reason you'd be doing that is because you've rigged it. Right? Then no mob bookie is going to take that. And in fact, he's not going to take any of your other action. And if you call him again, he's going to break your legs. So it's going to regulate itself. You don't need to worry about it unless it's the mob actively doing it. And I don't think they're in that business quite as much anymore. I think that's just not really what they're doing the way they might have been before. So all of that is to say, it's just a real shame. And hopefully we can get away from it. already MLB is taking some action. I think in the not too distant future, we're going to see sports books completely, whether they're forced to or do it voluntarily, we're going to see them completely eliminate individual player prop bets in college sports because those kids are just too exposed to getting manipulated for relatively small bribes. It's too easy to get to kids who just don't make millions of dollars. It should be hard to get to an Emmanuel Class A. Apparently it wasn't. It should be hard. It's much easier to get to a low major college basketball player. So this is not the end. This is not the end. It's probably just the beginning, and we're probably headed toward a long, dragged-out fight of trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, and I'm not sure what that's going to look like, especially now that not only sports books and betting companies, but also sports leagues and sports television networks and sports teams have so much money wrapped up in sports gambling. It's going to be very difficult to put that toothpaste all the way back in the tube, and I think ultimately that's to the detriment of competitive integrity and our sporting society. We'll talk to Jen Cease on St. Louis City. That's coming up after this. You're listening to Gray Bar Sports Open Line on the voice of St. Louis, KMOX.
Overhead Door Company of St. Louis. voice of St. Louis, KMOX.
Hello, I'm John Rooney. Congratulations to KMOX on 100 years strong, truly making KMOX the voice of St. Louis.
Gray Bar Sports Open Line continues on KMOX 104.1 FM, 1120 AM, and on the free Odyssey app, on Twitter, on Facebook. We're on YouTube, wherever else you're streaming KMOX. You can get in on the conversation by tweeting us, by commenting, by calling 314-436-7900. That's 314-436-7900. Kyle Sixta is standing by to take your calls, but not for the next couple of minutes because Jen Cease is with us of our own KMOX and all over. Speaking of somebody who's on all your social media pages, Jen Cease certainly is, and all of her St. Louis City coverage, and she's going to let us in on a little bit of what's been going on in the early offseason for City. Jen, how you doing?
Soccer never ends, Nate.
It never does. In this case, I mean, in MLS circles, it kind of feels like it literally never does. Because, I mean, we just got through the first round of the playoffs, and right. You and I are pretty deep into St. Louis City offseason storylines already. So let's talk, first of all, about the biggest news for the moment, which is Corey Ray, the new sporting director for St. Louis City. Former MLS Next Pro Executive of the Year in 2022 when he was with Columbus Crew 2, been an assistant GM in Toronto. He had kind of a nebulous soccer role with Montreal most recently, where he was very much involved in the high-end workings of the club, but also was not the final decision maker. He talked about that some of the press conference. Let's start big picture. What were your biggest takeaways or impressions of your first time hearing him speak at that press conference?
You know, it was really great being there, and boy, is it really a departure from Lutz. I think if you've gotten to know Lutz Pfannenstiel over the years, and I know Nate, you had known Lutz early on. Corey is just a very different personality. I think just getting to know him, a different kind of way he speaks to the media, at least so far. And it seems like a little bit of a different approach he might try to have when it comes to scouting. Now, he didn't, of course, lay all his cards on the table. I think he'd only really been in St. Louis for like 3 days and had to go back, of course, across the border to Canada. And he hasn't gotten his family settled or anything like that. But he did talk a little bit about wanting to take a look closely at data analytics and making sure those were making a big part of the decision making. And I'm not saying that Lutz didn't do that, but I think Lutz also really weighed heavily on the eye test and fit of personality and things like that. So it'll be really interesting to see what Corey Ray does in terms of how he looks at who's going to make a good fit at whatever particular position for the team, and also given how the team's going to play in their next style. Is it going to be City's first debut as a team? Is it going to be that 2.0 that Lutz Pfannenstiel wanted to have? So it'll be interesting to see. I think we've only seen the beginning of Corey Ray.
You know, it's interesting. I hadn't even really thought about it until you were comparing, his personality and the way he was dealing with the media to Lutz. The other element of that is that he's dealing with kind of a very different media than Lutz Pfannenstiel was dealing with when he first came into the role, which was a media that kind of reflected a city and a fan base so excited to have a team. And Pfannenstiel was coming in but well before the opening kickoff of the first team. And then into that first season when it was just all sunshines and rainbows out of the gate. Now, Corey Ray's kind of coming into a fan base, into a city, and to, as a result, a media environment where folks are maybe a little bit more jaded now after a couple of unsuccessful seasons, maybe a little bit more skeptical of what they're hearing from a St. Louis City microphone behind a podium, right? So he's having to grapple with that, which was not his own doing. He didn't create this situation, but he's coming into one where folks are a little bit disappointed and frustrated.
You got a really great point there. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. Lutz Pfannenstiel came in when just the city was, we remember, just so excited that we've got a team now. Finally, we deserved a team for so many years. We are the soccer capital of the United States. Let's go. And what a crazy first year we had, right? And then you had the disappointing second year and the disappointing third year, and it just kind of got worse from there. So yeah, Corey Ray is walking into an environment where he's got to prove something up, much like, when David Critchley took over or John Hackworth took over as interims, they've got to kind of prove up to a jaded audience. Now, as I understand, our St. Louis media Midwest media is rather friendly, maybe compared to European media or the coast media. So I didn't get any impressions there, but there definitely were some already, really good questions from the media about how are you going to take this approach given this crazy first season, but the fact that there were improvements to be made, and we certainly saw those places that got hidden in City's first year. Like City didn't always play great under Bradley Carnell. We won in that first year, but the style of soccer had holes in it, and it became exposed in year 2 and year 3. So how is Corey going to make sure he fills those gaps? And how is he really going to work with utilizing staff and filling staff roles? He made a point several times in this press conference to say that he's not going to be doing this alone. He's not a one-man band. He's not going to do this alone. He sees some gaps, I think, in some of the decision-making process when it comes to scouting locally, scouting internationally, scouting domestically, and how you put those together and how the City team as a whole. He didn't say specifically who, but I'm thinking he's talking about staffing as well as maybe up to the front office of how they work and communicate together. So I think he's looking to make some pretty broad changes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly how that dynamic unfolds. John Hackworth is expected to stay with the club as technical director, even though he was reportedly one of the finalists, along with Brentford technical director Lee Dykes, the Premier League, who Corey Ray beat out in the late stages of the process to get the City sporting director job. You mentioned Bradley Carnell, who, of course, has now been MLS Manager of the Year in Philadelphia this season. We talk about John Hackworth. We talk about David Critchley, who have had their turns as interim head coaches of City at different points. Hackworth a couple of seasons ago and Critchley this year. And all of that leads toward the first big Corey Ray decision, which is who is going to be St. Louis City's manager going into next season. The good news is City beat their timeline pretty considerably on getting a sporting director in. So Corey Ray is not quite as far behind the 8 ball as maybe you might have expected at the time that Lutz Pfannenstiel was let go, because it looked like things were going to get really messy with those timelines. At the same time, City have been without a permanent manager since May. So we're getting into a long absence here without a permanent manager, and he's going to be coming into a search that presumably is at least sort of underway. What impression did you get about what he's going to prioritize in a manager?
He wouldn't really get really granular when it came to, style of play or what he specifically wants. But he did talk about the fact that it's got to be somebody he can work with. So it's got to be somebody that can communicate with him, that can work with him, cooperate with him, that understands what City, and this is, I think, going to also include Diego Gigliani. And to your point that you just made, Diego was taking a lot of heat for being involved in saying, first earlier in the season, like, hey, I'm not really going to make those sporting kind of on the field decisions. Well, when we lose Lutz Pfannenstiel, Diego Gigliani is doing exactly that. So I think it's good. It gets him a heat off Diego's back in terms of having somebody there that can make those choices. But when it comes to a coach, I think it's going to be who fits the style of play that they decide to do and who can make those decisions, who can work with the players that Corey wants to bring in. So I think they're going to have a shared vision. Now, I'm also going to say, I've made no bones about the fact that I'm a Critch fan. I like David Critchley. I like John Hackworth. I think, if he could work well with either one of those, I think that they would do a great job. David Critchley's already got the team. He's already won the locker room. He's already knows the players believe that he will work with them. So it'll be interesting. I would love to be behind closed doors to see if Critch could work with somebody like Corey Ray and see if he actually has a chance at that. But I think it's going to be, for Corey, I think it's going to be, can this be somebody that can work with me on these decisions and then utilize the players I recruit and collect for the club the way we envision?
Yeah, and some of that recruiting, if you will, has already been done with Roman Berkey signing that contract extension as a designated player that was announced in that final home game. Really cool announcement, the way they did it, announcing it for the fans there in the stadium rather than initially on social media as would normally be the case. So that takes up a DP spot, but still, City have a pretty good amount of roster flexibility. There's expected to be a decent amount of turnover. I would think that's an attractive situation for a new sporting director to come into, knowing that he's not going to be locked into a whole lot of roster decisions that are kind of hangovers from a previous regime.
Yeah, I would think so. If you're somebody that really wants to dig your hands in and get dirty, if you will, that I think, and it seems like he likes that. He really wants to figure things out. He talked about being a process person, that if there's a process to have, he's always noodling on how to make it better. So I think the more Corey has to work on, the impression I got is the happier he might be. Now, as you know, Nate, as well as I do, time is not on City's side. Time is not on anybody's side right now. They've already been a little bit behind the eight ball. They've got to work with the players that they currently have. We know Ben Munt is returning with the team as backup goalkeeper for Roman Berkey. I think that was a great choice. But we have a lot of other players that City has to decide on, contracts that we just simply haven't heard on. So I think there's a lot for him and Diego. And maybe if they're already talking to a coach, who knows, got to figure about the current players. And then they need that time to be able to go out and get players and do so quickly. I think David Critchley made a really good point earlier in this season, especially as he was trailing off towards the end of it, of saying having a solid preseason is so, so important. It was really hard for Hack. It was really hard for Critch to come in as interims and try to be successful when you didn't have preseason lay the ground. So I think the sooner that City can not only get their coach in place, but start really deciding on these players as well, only bodes best. They've got to get started sooner than later, and it can't be after January 1.
Jen Cease of KMOX is with us here talking St. Louis City. Jen, one more for you as you're talking about kind of where we're at in the offseason and what's to come. This is putting you on the spot a little bit, but it's as open-ended as you want it to be, whether it's one of those returning player or existing players, but who are on expiring contracts who you want to bring back, whether it's an area of the field that you want to see them bolster with players from the outside, whether it's just something stylistically you want to see them do or get back to. What would be your top priority or two that comes to mind if you were in Corey Ray's position and if you had that, maybe even if you were in Carolyn Kindle's position and you had the overarching authority to do whatever you wanted with St. Louis City this offseason, what would you be prioritizing?
Well, as you know, I've talked about it before, I like speed. I don't think City's fast enough as a team as a whole. Do we have a couple, Zhang? Do we have a few fast players? Thomas Totland? Sure, we have a little bit of that, but I think we could definitely use just speed all around. So I'd like to see a speedier team that's threatening, that make me cringe like Denny Bouanga does for LAFC when they get on the ball. You're like, oh no, I want to see more of that for City. So that's kind of an overall skill or a physical attribute I'd like to see. But I'll tell you what, when it comes to returning players, I'd really like to see some of the original spine there. It probably won't be everybody, and I don't know what Edward Lubin's role is going to be or what his capability is going to be. I totally understand his family situation, but having somebody like Adu come back would be amazing. And I'm a Klaus fan. I know not everybody is always happy with the way Klaus performs and putting the balls in the back of the net himself, but I still think he's very City identity, and I would love to see Klaus be back with the team.
Well, all I heard is you said Denis Bouanga, and I stopped listening. So I think everybody heard it here first. Jen Cease is calling Denis Bouanga to St. Louis City. Did I get that right?
He's amazing. I mean, the guy, you've seen it, Nate. He can be in the 98th minute, score a goal, and still do a flip. I mean, there's just, Sung Min would be great too. I Sung Min would be amazing, but to have somebody of that caliber where you just, as the opponent, when they get on the ball and you go, oh no, that is what you want to have. You want to have more of those players for City. Marcel Hartle was starting to do that towards the end of the season. So maybe he'll be back, of course, but to see players like that with quality consistently and make the other team go, God, we can't let that guy get the ball.
Jen, we appreciate you so much, as always. Great to talk City with you, and I'm sure we will be visiting plenty more as the offseason continues and Corey Ray's vision for City unfolds. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Kyle.
And if it hasn't been mentioned on KMOX, I think it probably was at some point, but talking to Jen reminds me, a shout-out to Jen's daughter, Marin. Congratulations for her commitment to play soccer for the St. Louis University Billikens in the coming years. We're going to see plenty of her on the field at Herman Stadium for what has been the dominant women's soccer program in the Atlantic 10, although this year tripped up in the A10 semis and then, despite an RPI of 31, left out of the NCAA tournament. So that snapped a string of 7 straight years the Billikens women's team had been in the NCAA tournament. The men's team is still kicking, literally and figuratively. They'll have the A10 semis at Herman Stadium tomorrow night against Davidson, a chance to advance to next weekend's A10 championship game. Hopefully on Thursday night, we'll be able to talk to somebody. I don't know yet if it's going to be somebody from SLU Media or maybe head coach Kevin Kalish, but the plan is to have somebody Billikens men's soccer on for Thursday evening show, because even if they were to lose, they would still have a shot at the NCAA tournament, probably in a largely similar situation to the women's team where they'd kind of be sweating it out during the selection show. But if they win, you'd think that strengthens their cause considerably. And obviously, if they win the next 2 games and the A-10 tournament title to go with their A-10 regular season title, they would be in the NCAA tournament guaranteed. Speaking of postseason or lack thereof, Mizzou football probably out of the college football playoff now. Probably we're headed that way anyway with a true freshman third-string quarterback. But certainly you'd think that fate is sealed after a home loss to Texas A&M, the third Mizzou defeat of the season. Came in Columbia over the weekend. We'll talk about it after this. Gray Bar Sports Open Line continues next.
Now that we're getting older, we've
Saturday night, it's men's Billikens basketball as they face Grand Canyon. Pre-game 6:45. Tip at 7 on 104.1 FM KMOX.
Gray Bar Sports Open Line on KMOX. The Missouri Tigers a 38-17 loss to third-ranked Texas A&M over the weekend in Columbia. It was a third loss in the last 4 games for Mizzou, which will be back home for a night game this coming Saturday against Mississippi State, then at Oklahoma and at Arkansas to finish out the regular season. It's still mostly a successful season, I would say, for Missouri if they can get to their, win the last 3, certainly, and get to 9. Even if they finish 8-4, I think that's probably a decent season under the circumstances, which included losing, I guess, presumed backup starting quarterback Sam Horn in the opening game of the year against Central Arkansas, who was technically at the time still, I guess, the number 1 because the position had been that he and Bo Pribula were in a yet undetermined quarterback competition going into the opening week. And then Bo Pribula gets hurt against Vanderbilt. And that's the real inflection point of the season. Another one is losing to Alabama by 3 at home. That felt like a really, really good opportunity at the kind of statement win that has eluded Missouri under Eli Drinkwitz. In fact, he's won every game against unranked teams the last few years, and he's yet to beat a ranked team. So, I mean, it just Missouri has, that's been the story for Mizzou, right? It's not breaking any ground to say that Missouri has almost entirely won the games they're supposed to win, including finding a way to win an ugly game against Auburn. Then the week after the Alabama game on the road in overtime, placed Jordan Hare that's, kind of underrated right now in terms of how difficult it is to play because Auburn has just been sort of a dysfunctional program over the last now quite a few years. But that's a really difficult place to play, especially a night game that it was, especially when fans are really engaged in the game the way they were because Auburn was in it with a chance to win. And Missouri pulling that game out, Missouri getting so close against a really good Alabama team, and then pulling out a game that oftentimes they would have found a way to lose in the past on the road against Auburn in overtime. That combination gave me a lot of hope going into Vanderbilt. I was really disappointed by the loss to Alabama, but I was still very hopeful. At that point, a one-loss team playing in what is not an especially difficult environment compared to other places in the SEC in Nashville against Vandy. And I felt that was a very winnable game, and I still feel it probably was. And unfortunately for Missouri, the play when Bo Pribula got hurt just totally changed the complexion of that game and of their season, both because Bo Pribula didn't score on 4th down and goal from the 1, which would have put Missouri on top of that game, but more importantly, because he dislocated his ankle and is out for the remainder of at least the regular season. And as a result, it put Matt Zoller's third-string true freshman in the game to start for Mizzou for presumably the rest of the year. And, of course, then even he almost got Mizzou in the end zone on that Hail Mary at the end of the game that came up inches short and would have pushed the game into overtime had they made the extra point. Or maybe Eli Drinkwitz would have said, forget it, let's go for 2 and try to get 3 yards to win the game right here. This is a season of bad luck, I think, for Mizzou. The Alabama game, they did it to themselves a little bit. The unsportsmanlike penalty in the first quarter, some of the, Bo Pribula's bad decisions throwing the football. But I think this is a year where if Mizzou is healthier, and in particular, just if Bo Pribula stays healthy the whole year, they easily could have beaten Vanderbilt or Alabama or both. And you really only had to beat one. If you win one of those games, you have to win the games you're supposed to win, and then you have to win 2 out of 4 against the ranked opponents they've played or will play. A&M, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Oklahoma. If Mizzou goes 10-2 with losses, the only 2 losses to 2 of those 4 teams, they're in the playoff. As it looks now, they've lost to all 3 of the ranked teams, and they're likely to lose to all 4 because Oklahoma on the road is going to be a massive challenge for a young guy like Matt Zollers. And unfortunately, it's going to be a lost season. I think there are overreactions with respect to Eli Drinkwitz's job. I understand Missouri fans are very frustrated. It makes perfect sense for Missouri fans to be very frustrated. and I don't think anybody's calling for his job per se. Maybe some people are on the fringes, but there are folks who are overreacting to this. The fact that he lost even handily at home to A&M with a third-string true freshman quarterback making his first career start means almost nothing to me. In fact, the fact that they were as competitive as they were, the fact that Vegas had them as only 6.5-point underdogs going into the game, that's shocking to me. And that speaks volumes about the talent and depth on this roster compared to Missouri teams of old, and what Eli Drinkwitz has done to overhaul Missouri's program from a talent and depth standpoint to make it capable of standing up against big-name programs in the SEC. That wouldn't have been true before. So nothing that's happened this year has made me think Eli Drinkwitz can't be a guy for Missouri who takes them at least one more step to getting into the playoff. Now, if Eli Drinkwitz leaves this offseason, which I think is more likely than not, because of the volume of high-profile jobs that are out there, and because at least one, if not two or three of those schools are going to swing and miss at their top guys, right? I mean, there's only one Lane Kiffin to go around. Suppose now people are saying maybe even the Giants could be interested in him because of the Jackson Dart angle and their familiarity with each other from Ole Miss. There's only one Lane Kiffin, and he might well stay at Ole Miss. So could Eli Drinkwitz be a second or third choice at Florida? Could he be a second or third choice at LSU? Probably not. I think John Summerall would be above him in their power rankings, and he'll probably take the job. Could he be a second or third or fourth choice at Penn State, which is in kind of a sketchy situation now? If they thought they were going to get Curt Cignetti, that's not happening. So where are they going now after firing a coach they felt couldn't win the big one, but had been pretty successful? Hiring a guy in Eli Drinkwitz who can't win a ranked game doesn't seem like an answer that's going to make Penn State very happy. So where do they go? But I think it's more likely than not that Eli Drinkwitz positions himself for those jobs, and that if he wants one, he can probably get one. I could see the argument that if he takes one, Mizzou fans aren't crying too much if they think they can go find somebody, because the applicant pool would be totally different, much better now than it was when Eli Drinkwitz got it, because from an infrastructure standpoint, talent standpoint, every way, this job is much better than it was. But in general, I think anybody pretending that you take anything about who Eli Drinkwitz is as a coach out of losing to Texas A&M with a third-string quarterback probably is a bit of a prisoner of the moment and needs to be waiting for the offseason when the recruiting winds start to pour in again and the hope is restored again about what Mizzou can be next year and beyond, even as SEC schedules get more and more and more difficult with a 9-game conference season. We got to take a break. We'll be back to wrap up after this on KMOX.
Dan owed an unbelievable amount of money to the IRS.
Hi, this is Bob Ramsey. Congratulations to KMOX, home of the Billikens, 100 years strong as the voice of St. Louis.
Wrapping up Gray Bar Sports Open Line on this Tuesday evening on KMOX. Nate Gatter with you in for Matt Pauley. Kevin Wheeler will be with you for Sports Open Line tomorrow evening. I'll be back on Thursday. Plan is for Matt Pauley to be back with you next week. We spoke to Josh Schertz, head coach of the St. Louis Billikens men's basketball team. During the first hour, we talked to Amy Markscores about the St. Louis Blues, Jen Cease about St. Louis City. In our second hour, we touched on Mizzou football. We touched on the Cleveland Guardians, 2 relief pitchers who were indicted in federal court in the Eastern District of New York. We talked about a whole lot of things going on around St. Louis sports. And you can go back and hear any of that on the free Odyssey app where the podcasts are of this show and any of our other shows. You can also listen live to all of our content here on that free Odyssey app. We appreciate all of you for being with us. Nate Gatter, my producer, Kyle Sixta. We will be back with you. Don't forget tomorrow evening with Kevin Wheeler for Rush Hour Sports at 5, Sports Open Line at 6. Thank you to all of our guests and to you for tuning in. This has been Gray Bar Sports Open Line. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the voice of St. Louis, 104.1 FM, KMOX.
You're listening to Leaf Filter Radio and the guru of gutter protection himself.